They didn't even look up when she walked in. Just another black woman in plain clothes, black blouse, tan pants, no badge, no threat. One officer yawned, another slurped coffee, and the third, Officer Kellen, pointed at her shoes and muttered, "Guess the janitor's late again." Laughter followed, easy, loud, too familiar. She kept walking, calm, still, watching everything. No one offered help. No one asked her name. But when she reached the hallway outside the main office, Kellen cut her off. "You lost, sweetheart?" he said, stepping directly into her path. "This ain't the courthouse, and we don't do walk-ins." She stayed silent. He leaned in closer, breath thick with arrogance. "Unless you're here to post bail for your son, what did he do this time, huh? Car stereo? Little weed?" A quiet pause. She blinked once. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice low, almost polite. That was enough. He smiled widely. "You heard me. Don't play innocent. We know how y'all operate. Quick hands, no records, and a big mouth when you get caught." Another officer chuckled from the break room. "Probably shoplifted that blouse, too." She didn't flinch, didn't step back. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you for your honesty," then kept walking. But Kellen wasn't done. "Hey!" he barked, loud enough for the others to hear. "Get her out of here before she files one of those civil rights complaints. Or worse, asks for a supervisor." One last laugh. Then someone, not her, threw a paper cup. It bounced off the wall and splattered her shoulder with cold coffee. She froze. Just for a second. Long enough for the shame to register. Long enough for the camera in your mind to zoom in on that moment when a grown woman, a professional, was publicly humiliated inside the very building that was supposed to protect the people. And still, she said nothing. Because in less than 20 minutes, the same men who mocked her would be standing in the briefing room, facing a podium. And at that podium would be her, Chief Amara Lewis, the newly appointed head of the Coldwater Police Department. The first black woman to lead this corrupt, unaccountable precinct. A precinct riddled with racial profiling, excessive force complaints, and internal cover-ups masked as policy. She hadn't come to be greeted. She came to listen, to observe, to expose. And she had already seen enough. Justice wasn't coming later. It was already in the building, watching, taking notes. And when it finally spoke, it wouldn't ask for silence. It would demand accountability. And Coldwater would never forget who walked through their doors, unarmed, uninvited, and completely in control. Chief Amara Lewis didn't need to guess what kind of department she had just walked into. She had seen it, smelled it, felt it in her skin the moment she stepped through the side entrance. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, just that thick, stale air of unchecked power and casual cruelty. Coldwater PD wasn't just broken. It was confident in its rot, and that confidence only grows in silence. That was why she didn't announce herself. Not yet. Announcements gave people time to prepare. Amara wanted to see the truth without the polish, the unfiltered version. Because the only thing more dangerous than police misconduct is the culture that defends it behind closed doors. She walked the corridors alone, letting the building speak. Cracked tiles, faded posters from campaigns long defunded, photos of officers shaking hands with mayors under framed slogans like integrity, service, honor. A brittle irony. Every hallway she passed echoed with a history that excluded people who looked like her. And not just in color, also in values. Leadership in places like Coldwater wasn't earned. It was inherited, protected, guarded like a family business. A legacy of impunity passed down through decades of unchallenged power. She paused briefly near the operations board, where the day's assignments were scribbled in blue marker. Traffic stops, drug sweeps, patrol rotations. One line caught her eye. Routine ID checks, Westwood and Marlin. She knew that intersection, poor side of town, mostly black and Latino residents. A routine ID check in a place like that was never routine. It was a code, a quiet system of targeting without warrants. The kind of low-visibility policing that doesn't make headlines but wrecks lives one citation at a time. Racial profiling masked as policy. Down the hall, Amara stepped into the break room. 4 officers, 3 white men and 1 woman with blonde hair and a clipboard. The laughter died the moment she entered. One of them glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. The others just watched her, saying nothing. She didn't introduce herself, just walked to the coffee machine, poured half a cup, then stood silently, listening. You learn more in silence than in speeches. That was something her father taught her long ago. Officer number 3 finally broke the quiet. So, you new here or something? His tone was flat, laced with the false friendliness that comes with suspicion. She just nodded and replied, "Just observing today." That was enough to disarm them. She didn't look threatening. That's how she stayed invisible. That's how she gathered everything. In less than 30 minutes inside the building, she had already clocked 4 red flags. 1, derogatory jokes whispered about the new diversity hire before they realized she was in the room. 2, a patrol sergeant ignoring a junior officer's complaint about use of force during a foot chase the week before. 3, a whiteboard marked with, quote, goals for citations, which, though illegal in most states, still existed behind locked doors. And 4, perhaps the most telling, the silence of those who knew better but stayed quiet. As she left the room, her phone buzzed once in her pocket. It was a coded message from her liaison at the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Just 3 words. Eyes on Coldwater. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That message had been years in the making. Amara walked through the precinct's holding wing next. Empty cells, scuffed walls, a lingering scent of bleach, and something older, like old sweat and broken spirits. The kind of place where stories ended in silence. On one wall hung a laminated list of use of force guidelines. It looked untouched. A prop, just like the locked filing cabinet below it, which she already knew contained 2 years' worth of misconduct reports, most of which had been lost in transition when the previous chief retired abruptly 6 months ago. That retirement wasn't random. It was a shield. Coldwater's former chief, Thomas Greeley, had stepped down right before a scheduled federal audit. No farewell ceremony, no press, just gone. But Amara knew why. An anonymous whistleblower had filed a federal complaint 2 weeks prior, naming 5 officers in a pattern of falsifying arrest records and planting evidence. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. The DOJ sent Amara not to fill a vacancy, but to dismantle a system quietly. She wasn't here to play chess, she was here to flip the board. She continued toward the evidence locker, which was, predictably, unattended. The logbook was handwritten. Sloppy. Entire sections are missing. Her eyes narrowed. She took mental notes. Missing chain of custody logs meant cases could be challenged or tossed. That was more than negligence. It was sabotage disguised as laziness. The kind of tactic that leaves victims without recourse and lets dirty cops walk free. Police corruption doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a paper trail that disappears in plain sight. She exited back into the main hallway, where the sound of footsteps caught her ear. It was Officer Luis Martinez, mid-30s Puerto Rican, with eyes that darted too quickly and shoulders that slumped from years of playing it safe. Their eyes met briefly. He hesitated, then nodded subtly. She could tell he recognized something. Maybe in her posture, maybe in her silence. Some people can spot purpose a mile away. Others only notice when it finally speaks. Luis didn't say anything, but before walking past her, he whispered just loud enough, "Be careful. Not all poison's loud." It wasn't a warning. It was a lifeline. A quiet signal from someone on the edge, waiting for permission to stop surviving and start resisting. By the time Amara stepped into the administrative wing, the intercom buzzed overhead. A voice, monotone, male, tired, announced, "All units to the briefing room, 10 minutes. She turned slowly. It was time. The faces she had watched mock her, doubt her, humiliate her. They would soon learn exactly who they had disrespected, and what she had come to do. The briefing room in Coldwater PD hadn't changed in years. Mismatched chairs, fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like dying hornets, a crooked whiteboard with faded marker stains and a wall-mounted flag yellowing at the edges. But today, the room would become something else, a reckoning chamber. Officers filed in casually, coffee cups in hand, laughter still echoing from whatever crude jokes they had been telling in the hallway. Most of them didn't even notice the woman standing quietly near the side door. Those who did gave her only the kind of glance you give a custodian or maybe a temp. Captain Ray Brewer called the room to order. Stocky, red-faced, and comfortable in power, Brewer didn't bother hiding the contempt in his voice when he announced, "All right, folks, I know this is short notice, but we've got a special visitor today." His tone was dismissive, almost performative, like introducing someone he didn't think would matter. "Some of you may have heard, Chief Greeley's replacement has been named, and she's here, today." Murmurs rippled. A few heads turned. No one clapped. A few smirked. That's when she stepped forward. Amara moved slowly, deliberately, placing a slim black folder on the podium with the department's seal stamped in gold. When she looked up, the room went still. Not because they recognized her, but because something in her presence disrupted the rhythm of the space. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing, purposefully, on the faces that had mocked her less than an hour ago. Kellen's smirk evaporated before it fully formed. Officer Daniels, the one who had whispered about her clothing in the break room, swallowed hard. "My name," she said with poise, "is Amara Lewis. As of this morning, I am your new chief of police." Silence, pure and punishing. A full second passed, then two. Then a visible shift in the room, back straightening, eyes darting, chairs creaking under weight no one knew they were carrying. Amara didn't blink. "Before I begin, let me say this. I came here quietly. I didn't walk in with cameras or press. I didn't demand your attention. I simply observed. And what I witnessed in this building within my first hour was not just disappointing, it was revealing." Her voice was clear, even, but laced with something steel underneath. "From inappropriate conduct in common spaces, to a blatant disregard for professional decorum, to overt racial profiling coded as routine procedures on assignment boards. I've seen departments like this before. I've dismantled them before. But this," she gestured to the room, "this is different. Because some of you genuinely believe no one is watching." She paused just long enough to let that land. "I've read the internal affairs files. I know the lawsuits that got quietly settled. I know the difference between mistakes in the field and patterns of abuse. And I know which of you," she looked directly at the back row, "laughed when I was harassed in your own lobby 25 minutes ago." A flicker of recognition passed through the officers. Kellen shifted in his seat. Others glanced around, gauging reactions, calculating the temperature. But Amara didn't wait for them to find footing. "You don't need to respect me because I'm wearing a badge. You will respect the position, the oath, and the community you swore to protect. Public trust is not a given. It is earned. And this department, as it stands, has lost that trust." Another pause, then the folder opened. "I have here a preliminary audit report from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. It includes formal complaints from the last 3 years, complaints that were buried, mishandled, or never responded to. It also includes data from this precinct's citation and arrest records, data that shows statistically undeniable bias in how law enforcement is applied based on race, income level, and neighborhood." The room tightened. Someone coughed. Another officer uncrossed his arms slowly. Captain Brewer's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what this was, and he wasn't in control anymore. Amara continued, "Let me be perfectly clear. This isn't about a new sheriff in town speech. This is about accountability, equal protection under the law, and rebuilding this department from the inside out. Not all of you are corrupt, but too many of you are complicit. And that ends today. From the side of the room, Officer Lewis stood, quietly, steadily. "Chief Lewis," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "if you're serious about change, I'm with you." It was just one voice, but it shifted something. Some officers looked down. Others nodded, barely perceptible but real. Amara gave him a subtle nod. A small crack had formed in the wall. Still, the old guard wouldn't fold easily. Kellen finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "So what? You come in here, read some stats, and think you know this place? You don't know the streets. You don't know what it's like out there." Amara didn't look away. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to pull someone over for a broken taillight and end it with a bruised jaw and missing footage. I don't know what it's like to call harassment standard procedure. But I do know this. If you need unchecked power to feel safe in your job, then you're not protecting anyone. You're protecting yourself. And the badge was never meant for that." She stepped away from the podium. "If you can't serve with dignity, you won't serve at all. Internal audits begin this week. Use of force reports will be reviewed case by case. And from this moment forward, every officer in this department will be evaluated not just on performance, but on character." The room was quiet, not in fear, but in realization. Amara looked across the room one last time and said, "I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to make a difference. And whether that includes you or not, depends entirely on you." Then she walked out. Behind her, the department didn't collapse. Not yet. But something had shifted. And in places like Coldwater, even a shift as small as one honest voice in a room full of silence, that's how change begins. The next 72 hours inside Coldwater PD were like standing in a room full of glass just before an explosion. Silent, tense, one wrong move from shattering everything. Officers whispered instead of joking. Doors that used to stay propped open now closed quietly. Patrol shifts changed, but the energy was different. Not just nervousness, paranoia. And Chief Amara Lewis moved through it all like a scalpel, precise, steady, calm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet was doing the work for her. The first point of impact came that Thursday morning, just past 9 a.m. The department's internal review team, handpicked by Amara and flown in from out of state, arrived unannounced. 2 former federal investigators, 1 data analyst, 1 attorney with a history in police accountability lawsuits. They didn't come to observe, they came to audit. Every locker, every squad car, every single use of force report filed in the last 2 years. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer business as usual. This was a police accountability investigation, and it had teeth. By noon, the first blow struck. A cruiser registered to Officer Kellen was discovered to have an unlogged burner phone and a second unauthorized body cam, one not synced to the department's system. When questioned, he claimed it was for personal safety. But when the footage was reviewed, it showed multiple off-the-record stops. No citations filed, no paperwork, but clear visuals of intimidation tactics and unconstitutional searches. Civil rights violations, caught in his own private archive. Amara didn't hesitate. She ordered Kellen suspended without pay pending further investigation and had his locker sealed under chain of custody protocol. When he stormed into her office demanding an explanation, she simply looked him in the eye and said, "We don't negotiate with misconduct," then returned to her paperwork. The second flashpoint came from within. Officer Luis Martinez, once too afraid to speak, handed Amara a flash drive. No fanfare, no words. Just a subtle nod in the hallway. She viewed the contents that night in her office. The files included audio recordings from locker room conversations, WhatsApp screenshots between officers mocking citizens' names, and, most damning, a photo of the evidence room key left unattended inside a supply closet, time-stamped 2 hours before a high-profile case file mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't just negligence. It was organized sloppiness, a pattern of obstruction of justice that spanned at least 5 senior officers. Amara made no announcement, no press. But by morning, 3 new names were added to the suspension list. One of them, Sergeant Dunlap, had once been considered for the position she now held. When he received his notice, he crumpled the envelope and muttered to a fellow officer, "We're being hunted." No, Amara thought. Not hunted. Exposed. But the third and perhaps most visceral confrontation came unexpectedly. A community member, a young mother named Kira, walked into the precinct with her daughter in one hand and a file folder in the other. She didn't ask for an appointment. She asked for the chief. Amara met her in the lobby. No uniform, no guards, just eye contact and space to be heard. Kira opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos of bruises, a police report with entire paragraphs blacked out, and a handwritten letter from her 10-year-old daughter explaining how a man in blue pushed her mom onto the sidewalk and called her a liar. The report was labeled, "Subject resisted during wellness check." But there was no resistance, no wellness check, only fear, trauma, and abuse of authority that had gone unpunished for months. Amara didn't speak at first. She just nodded slowly, scanning the documents. Then she asked one question. "Do you remember the name on the officer's badge?" Kira hesitated. "It was Brewer," she whispered. "Ray Brewer." Captain Ray Brewer. The same man who had introduced Amara like she were just another bureaucrat. The same man who had resisted every policy change Amara had floated in her first week. The same man who now had his name buried in a misconduct report labeled "Closed for lack of evidence." Amara looked up at Kira, her voice low but sure. "You did the right thing coming here." And she meant it. That afternoon, she called for an emergency command staff meeting. Brewer walked in late, shoulders square, jaw tight. He sat directly across from Amara, smirking like a man who still believed this was temporary, that she was temporary. She pushed the folder across the table. "This was filed under your name." He flipped through it, unimpressed. "Another exaggerated claim. You know how these people get." Amara leaned forward, folding her hands. "Say that again." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said," she repeated, "say that again, to my face. Say these people again in this room." The silence was ice cold. No one moved, no one blinked. Brewer's smirk faded. "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," Amara interrupted. "And that's the problem." Then she stood. This department is no longer a fortress of protected egos. It is not a country club for bullies with badges. It is a public institution. And the public is watching. Brewer was removed from duty that evening. No press release, just a line in the morning report. Suspension issued pending formal investigation. But the ripple across the station was deafening. What had started as a quiet change in leadership was now an active reckoning. And the people who had once mocked her presence were suddenly finding it very hard to laugh. By the end of that week, the precinct was a ghost of its former self. The coffee jokes were gone. The smug banter, replaced by side glances and hushed meetings in corners. Amara didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. The truth was already loud enough. Officers who once strutted now shuffled. Those who used to smirk at her presence now avoided eye contact altogether. But Chief Lewis wasn't interested in fear. She was after something far more dangerous to the old culture, change rooted in truth. The fourth detonation came quietly, tucked inside a brown manila envelope that appeared on Amara's desk late Friday night. No name, no fingerprints, just a single label in black marker. "Watch this." Inside, a USB drive and a folded piece of paper with 3 words scribbled in all caps. From the inside. She watched the footage alone. What she saw wasn't just misconduct, it was a conspiracy. Grainy security footage showed 2 officers, names confirmed later as Deputy Rowland and Officer Byers, removing narcotics from evidence, replacing them with baking powder, and resealing the boxes. Date: 6 months ago. The case? A trafficking bust was used as a PR victory during an election year. Charges were dropped due to mishandled evidence. But the truth was worse. It had been intentional. Theft, fraud, tampering, obstruction of justice. Worse still, The footage ended with a shot from inside the precinct's basement garage, Captain Brewer himself meeting with a man in plain clothes, handing over a package. The image wasn't crystal clear, but the voice caught on the audio was unmistakably his. "Tell Kellen that shipment's covered. Now disappear." Amara exhaled slowly. The web was wider than she thought. She scheduled a closed-door emergency call with the Department of Justice that same night. The findings, paired with her team's growing stack of internal violations, would now escalate the case to multi-agency federal oversight. Coldwater PD was no longer under review. It was under federal investigation for corruption and civil rights abuse. The next morning, Amara called Officer Lewis to her office. She needed someone she could trust, and he had earned that trust. She shared the video with him. His reaction was silent but visceral, jaw clenched, fist curled. Then, after a long pause, he said, "We have to let the town see this. They need to know the truth." And Amara agreed. That Sunday, the town of Coldwater held its monthly Community Safety Forum, usually a boring, poorly attended meeting hosted at the local high school auditorium. But this time, Amara made sure the invitations went wide. Flyers, social posts, quiet word of mouth through local churches and small businesses. And most critically, she made sure the media showed up. When the lights dimmed and the microphone clicked on, Amara didn't give a speech. She just played the video. No introduction, no commentary, just the raw footage. Gasps. Silence. Then murmurs rising like a slow wave. Some shouted. Some cried. One woman covered her face with both hands and whispered, "That's my cousin's case." But Amara didn't flinch. She waited. Then she stepped to the mic and finally said, "This is your police department, and this is why it has to change." That moment, the fifth detonation, was when the town of Coldwater turned. What had once been whispered now became undeniable. Public trust had been broken. And Amara had handed the people the proof in their own language: video, voice, truth. By Monday, Amara filed formal complaints with the state attorney general's office. 4 officers were placed on administrative leave, and a joint investigation task force began collecting statements from former detainees, citizens, and internal witnesses. More evidence surfaced. Dozens of suppressed complaints were unearthed, some nearly a decade old. The dots connected with terrifying ease: patterns of harassment, coerced confessions, planted evidence, retaliatory patrols. It wasn't a few bad apples. It was a culture designed to silence. The 6th flashpoint came from the officers themselves. A group of junior staff, mostly Black, Latino, and female officers, requested a private meeting with Amara. There, one by one, they told their stories: how their complaints were buried, how promotions were dangled like bait, then pulled away when they refused to get with the program. One officer, a rookie named Rachel Thomas, spoke last. Her voice trembled, but her words landed like thunder. "I joined this department to serve people who look like my family, but I was told on day 1 to forget the sob stories and stick to quotas. I've wanted to quit every day since. Until now." Amara nodded. "You don't have to quit. You just have to fight smarter, and I'll have your back." Word spread quickly that something new was taking root in Coldwater. A culture of reform, of truth-telling, of dignity. But change, even righteous change, comes with consequences. That night, someone slashed the tires on Amara's unmarked car, left a message keyed into the driver's side. Traitor. She didn't report it to the press. She didn't even mention it in the morning briefing. She had the tires replaced and kept walking, because intimidation doesn't work on someone who's already faced worse. The final flashpoint of the week, the 7th detonation, came when Amara received an encrypted file from a former prosecutor now working as a whistleblower. Inside? A leaked memo from the previous chief, Greeley himself, outlined a discretionary enforcement strategy for use during election cycles. It instructed officers to increase arrests in specific zip codes known to have low voter turnout and poor legal representation. It was targeted suppression dressed as law and order. Amara stood at her office window, holding the printout in one hand, coffee in the other. This wasn't just a broken department. This was systemic abuse wrapped in the flag. And now it was her responsibility to burn it down to the roots. She looked at the memo one last time, then dropped it into the fireproof evidence bag beside her desk.
"I didn't come here to clean house," she whispered. "I came to build a new one."
And outside her office, for the first time in Coldwater's recent history, the silence no longer felt like fear. It felt like the pause right before something better begins. The full sweep was supposed to take 6 months. It took less than 3. When Amara first arrived in Coldwater, she expected to dig through layers of dysfunction, lies buried beneath red tape and bureaucracy. But what she found wasn't buried. It was wide open, shameless, and systemically maintained. And now, for the first time, it had a spotlight. But change doesn't happen in a straight line. It twists, it retaliates, it resists. The twist came on a Tuesday morning. Amara had just finished debriefing with the DOJ field liaison when her assistant knocked on the door, visibly shaken.
"Chief," she whispered, "you need to see this."
She handed over a manila envelope. Inside were 2 printed screenshots. The first was a doctored image of Amara in her college years, cropped and manipulated to imply she had once been affiliated with a known activist group labeled extremist by conservative media. The second was a forged email, sent from a fake DOJ address, suggesting Amara had rigged the audit in exchange for a political appointment. By noon, a right-wing blog had published the story, titling it, "Radical Plant? Coldwater's new chief accused of targeting police with federal help." By 2 p.m., it had hit 3 local radio stations. By evening, protesters gathered outside the precinct, waving thin blue line flags and shouting, "Resign, Amara! Resign!" Inside the building, the tension was nuclear. Officers who had stayed neutral were now being pushed to pick a side. Captain Brewer's allies, though suspended, were fueling a whisper campaign from the outside, painting Amara as a political pawn sent to dismantle real law enforcement. The phrase reverse racism started circulating through anonymous tip lines. The narrative was shifting, not based on facts, but fear. Amara didn't flinch. She called a press conference the next morning. No podium, no teleprompter, just a single camera, a folding chair, and a file box filled with names. "I've heard the noise," she began. "I've seen the headlines. I've been called radical, unqualified, and even criminal. But let me be clear, what's criminal is what this department allowed to happen for years. What's criminal is the evidence that was buried, the lives that were ruined, and the silence that bought careers." Then she opened the file box. "These," she said, lifting a stack of folders, "are real cases, real people. Victims of police misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power. And if standing up for them makes me controversial, then controversy is overdue." That video was clipped, shared, and went viral overnight. But Amara wasn't fighting for social media applause. She was fighting for institutional change. The viral moment created pressure, but the legal retaliation had just begun. A week later, she was served with a subpoena. A group of former officers, backed by a politically connected legal fund, filed a civil suit accusing her of creating a hostile work environment and retaliatory suspension without due process. The aim was clear: tie her hands in court, drain her resources, paint her as unstable. And it almost worked. The day the court date was announced, a local reporter cornered her in the parking lot, mic ready. "Chief Lewis, will you be stepping down while this lawsuit proceeds?" Amara didn't break stride. "If the truth bothers them," she said, "they should have acted better while they had the chance." But behind closed doors, she knew this was dangerous. Weaponized legal pressure was a classic tactic, one that killed reform before it could take root. She needed a counter-move. It came from someone she least expected. Luis walked into her office with a folder labeled payroll adjustments. Harmless enough. But inside wasn't a financial report. It was a timeline of internal payouts, unofficial settlements listed under discretionary budget adjustments. They weren't filed through HR. They were off books, and they totaled over $750,000 across 6 years. "These aren't mistakes," Louise said. "They're silencing fees." And among those names, the daughter of a former Coldwater councilman, a black teenager who had been wrongfully detained for loitering near the town's pharmacy, held for 9 hours. No charges, no call to family. But $15,000 was issued to her mother a month later, marked as community grant support. Amara closed the file slowly. The final twist wasn't just that Coldwater's leadership had broken the law, it was that they had institutionalized the cover-up, papered it over with euphemisms, framed payouts as community investment. Accountability was never just denied, it was bought and buried. That changed everything. Amara called for a special oversight hearing, bringing in DOJ officials, state auditors, and civil rights attorneys. She wasn't just requesting help now, she was requesting federal receivership. It was a nuclear option, a last resort intervention that would place the entire department under external control. The backlash was immediate. Conservative outlets framed it as a federal occupation. Local business groups pushed back, claiming it would destabilize the economy. But for the first time, the town was split. Not in loyalty, but in awareness. People were paying attention. Voices that had been silent, past victims, former officers, community elders, began showing up to city council meetings. They spoke names, told stories, demanded reform. The legal suit? It fell apart within weeks. Amara's team proved the forged email chain traced back to a private network funded by a former deputy's cousin. The image from college? A total fabrication. And when the truth came out, the noise died fast. The protests shrank. The blog retracted its story. And a state judge ruled in Amara's favor, calling the countersuit a strategic attempt to intimidate a public servant enacting reform. But the final blow, the one that truly shifted the soul of Coldwater, came not from a press room or court filing. It came from a teenager. At the next community forum, a 17-year-old girl named Naomi stood up with trembling hands and said, "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. When I said I was followed, when I said I was touched during a stop. My mom told me not to make trouble, that they'd say I was lying. But Chief Lewis, she didn't just believe me. She investigated. She made them afraid to touch anyone again." And for the first time in that high school gym, Amara wept. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a quiet, controlled tear sliding down her cheek. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption. For Naomi, for Luis, for everyone who had stayed quiet for too long. It was about making the badge mean something again. By the end of the month, Coldwater PD was under joint oversight. The department's leadership structure was dismantled. A community civilian board was formed to review all future misconduct cases. And Amara? She didn't take a victory lap. She got back to work. New training programs, trauma-informed policing, monthly public forums, officer mental health services, mandatory body cams with cloud-locked backup. She wasn't building a department. She was building a model. And cities across the region started to call. Not because she was perfect, but because she had proven that reform wasn't a myth. It just required courage, clarity, and an unshakable commitment to justice. And Coldwater, once forgotten, dismissed, and feared, had become a blueprint for accountability. Coldwater didn't change overnight. Justice never moves that fast, not when the wounds run decades deep. But what did change, undeniably, was the silence. The silence was gone. The same streets that once fell quiet when a squad car rolled past now echoed with real questions about training, fairness, dignity, and what it actually means to protect and serve. And at the center of it all stood Chief Amara Lewis, a woman who had walked into a hostile precinct alone, been laughed at, mocked, smeared, and still never raised her voice. She let the truth do the talking. 6 months after the first audit, the department hosted its first Community Transparency Day. It wasn't about press or optics. It was about pulling back the curtain. Tables were set up in the gym of the local middle school. Officers, real officers, not just top brass, stood beside posters explaining use of force policy, de-escalation training, and civilian complaint process timelines. Amara stood in the back, not to command, but to observe. It wasn't about her anymore, and that's how she knew the change was real. A boy no older than 9 walked up to the Meet Your Officers booth with a drawing in his hand. It was a crayon picture, stick figures mostly, but in the center was a black woman with a badge. "That's you," he said shyly, handing it to Amara. "My mom says you made the bad cops leave." Amara smiled, then crouched down beside him. "Your mom's right, but we didn't just make them leave. We're building something better in their place, for you, for everyone, because that was always the point. It was never about takedown, it was about transformation." Too often, stories about police reform end with one of two extremes, resignation or revenge. But Amara didn't resign, and she didn't take revenge. She rebuilt the system that tried to destroy her, from the inside out. She gave Coldwater something it hadn't had in a long time: trust. Not just trust in the law, but in the idea that the law could belong to everyone, not just those with the loudest voices or cleanest uniforms. And yes, there were still those who resented her, people who muttered when she walked by, officers who left rather than adapt. Old systems don't vanish without clawing back. But they didn't win, because people like Naomi, like Luis, like the teenager drawing pictures of police chiefs, they stayed. They stood up. They changed. A local journalist once asked Amara, "What's the moment you knew it was working?" She didn't say the audits, or the indictments, or the policy reforms. She said this: "There was a night, weeks into all of it, when I left the precinct around 1 a.m. It was quiet, dark, just me, walking to my car. And this man, an older black man I'd never seen before, crossed the street toward me. I tensed up just a little, and you know what he said? He said, 'I'm not scared of you. Not anymore.' And that's the first time I've said that about a badge." Then he tipped his hat and walked on. She paused in the interview, then added, "That's the moment. That's when I knew something real had started. Because power isn't just what you carry, it's what you leave behind." And Amara left behind more than policies and procedures. She left behind proof that leadership without ego, justice without theatrics, and policing with accountability aren't just buzzwords. They're possible, but only if we stop waiting for permission, only if we start by listening and then never stop pushing. Coldwater will never forget the day she arrived without a badge, without a title, just a quiet woman walking past laughter and insults. And they will never forget the moment they found out who she really was. She wasn't just the new chief. She was the turning point.